In the dim recesses of that which could scarcely be named, chaos, the great and yawning nothing, there stirred at last a presence, though she herself would not have called it awakening, not at first. Eurynome, or so some later tongues would name her, though the word tasted of iron and forgotten oaths, even in the silence, felt the void pressing upon her like a shroud drawn too tight across the breast. She was formless yet, a tremor of intent in the black, and her thoughts came slow, viscous, as though the darkness itself resisted their shaping. "Why here?" they whispered within her, not quite hers and yet inescapably so. Why now, when the nothing had sufficed so long? She extended what might have been an arm, slender, luminous as moonlit bone newly risen from a grave, and the gesture betrayed her before any word could form. Fingers splayed, then curled inward with the quick, furtive clutch of one who has woken from a dream, only to find the dream's teeth still at her throat. The void yielded nothing to her touch, it merely watched. And in that watching lay the first faint shiver of horror. She was observed, and by something that had no eyes. Dramatic, was it not, that the first act of creation should be so intimate a violation, beheld by the very abyss she sought to escape? From the coiling deeps there came then the serpent Ophion, vast and ancient as regret, his scales rasping against the nothing like a pen scratching across an unwritten page. He wound about her emerging form with the languid inevitability of a lover who has waited through centuries of unmade time. Eurynome did not recoil, could not, in truth, for the void left no room for flight, but her shoulders tensed beneath the imagined weight of silk and shadow. The instinctive propriety curdled into dread. He is warm, she thought, the notion sliding free in that free, unbidden way thoughts do when terror loosens the tongue of the mind. Warm as blood newly spilled, and yet the warmth promises only further unmaking. Their union began as all true creations must, in silence deeper than sound, a slow intertwining of will and scale, light and hunger. She felt him enter her as metaphor and fact at once, a key turning in a lock forged from starless night, and the revelation bloomed within her like ink dropped into clear water. I am the garden and the worm, she realized, the simile uncoiling with merciless clarity, the womb and the serpent that devours its own tail. Her breath, newly granted and newly cursed, hitched in the ornate chambers of her throat. One pale hand rose to press against the place where her heart would one day beat, as though to still the awful rhythm before it began. The gesture was small, almost maidenly, yet it spoke volumes of the horror now nesting inside her. The knowledge that this act, this sacred coupling, carried within it the seeds of every future wound. For even as their forms knit together, her limbs lengthening into the graceful, terrible architecture of a goddess, his coils thickening into the foundations of mountains yet unborn, Eurynome sensed the wrongness gathering at the edges of her sight. The void was not empty after all. It watched with the patient, smiling patience of a parlour guest who has already decided upon murder, but chooses first to take tea. She glimpsed it in the way Ophion's tongue flickered across her throat, tasting futures she could not yet name. Wars that would wear her name like a crown of thorns. Children who would call her mother and then curse her for it. This is wrong, the thought came again, more urgently now, laced with the psychological tremor of one who has stepped across a threshold and heard the door bolt shut behind her forever. I was not meant to remember the nothing so clearly. It clings. Yet she smiled. Oh, the exquisite irony of that smile, observed by you who already know how every creation ends in fracture and flood and the slow rot of forgetting. Her lips curved with a porcelain delicacy, where the eyes above them widened a fraction too far, pupils dilating like black blooms in poisoned soil. Suspense thickened the air between them. What would she birth, this unwilling architect? What if the world once loosed remembered its origin in the dark and came crawling back to reclaim her? Ophion tightened his embrace, scales gleaming now with the first false dawn of light, and Eurynome, Gaia, in other, kinder tales, felt the first true pang of creation tear through her, like a secret too vast to contain. She arched, a single involuntary cry escaping her, and in that sound lay all the horror of knowing. The nothing had not been banished. In the hush that followed the first violent flowering of worlds, Eurynome felt the new weight of her own flesh settle upon her like a garment cut from someone else's grave clothes. She had been the dove, soft, trembling, almost innocent, and yet the moment the vast egg slipped from her, something inside her had torn loose that could never be gathered back. It was mine. The thought came unbidden, slick and cold as the inside of a shell, and now it looks at me with eyes I did not give it. She watched Ophion coil about the luminous orb, his scales gleaming with possessive tenderness. The warmth he lent the egg was something older than the gentle heat of incubation. Each pulse of his body against the shell seemed to draw a fraction more of her out of herself. She perched nearby in her dove form, wings folded tight against the sudden chill that had nothing to do with the void. He's stealing the memory of my labor, she realized, the notion uncoiling with slow, serpentine inevitability. Soon I shall not even recall the precise ache of laying it. The horror of that possibility lodged behind her ribs like a swallowed needle. When the egg at last split, cracks racing across its surface with the sound of glaciers carving in some future age, Eurynome felt the birth as a second expulsion. Uranus unfurled overhead, vast and blue and already forgetting her. The Ourea thrust upward in brutal splendor. Pontus roared into being, tasting salt and freedom. Stars spilled like cold sparks. And Gaia, dear, terrible Gaia, rose with mountains for vertebrae and rivers for blood. Her new face turned toward the heavens in mute, indifferent wonder. Eurynome, still half dove, felt her own substance diluting into the newborn world. Every hill that lifted itself from Gaia's back pulled a piece of her identity with it. She was becoming landscape, becoming background. The psychological vertigo was exquisite, to give birth to a planet and feel oneself reduced in the same instant to scenery. They ascended Olympus together. She and the serpent, who now wore the satisfied air of a gentleman, was just patented another man's invention. The mountain reared beneath their feet as though eager to please, its marble halls blooming into existence at their approach. Eurynome moved through corridors of cloud and gold with the stiff grace of a hostess who suspects the servants have been whispering behind her back. Every glance Ophion cast across the newly minted cosmos carried the same proprietary gleam. One starlit evening, as they stood upon a balcony carved from frozen moonlight, he spoke the fatal words with the calm finality of a verdict.
It was my warmth alone that quickened the egg,
he declared, scales whispering against the stone.
I am the true author of all that is.
The statement struck her with the quiet force of a door closing in a dream from which one can never wake. For a long moment she merely regarded him, her divine eyes wide with the slow dawning realization that she was being erased while still standing in the room. He does not merely wish to share the glory, she understood with crawling clarity. He wishes me never to have existed at all. The thought brought a wave of nausea that had no physical cause. It was the horror of watching one's own reflection in a mirror, slowly turning its back. She struck him once, palm open, the blow ringing through Olympus like the first toll of a funeral bell. The impact jarred her more than him. She felt the reverberation travel up her arm and lodge somewhere behind her eyes, where it began to whisper that perhaps he was right. Perhaps she had only been the vessel after all. When he persisted, smiling that slow, patient serpent smile, she rose in full, awful majesty. With a gesture that cost her more of herself than she could yet measure, she hurled him downward, coils unraveling, body twisting in silent protest, into the black throat of the underworld. As the last gleam of his scales vanished into the dark, Eurynome stood alone upon the summit. The wind moved through her hair with the intimate familiarity of an old lover who has decided to become a strangler. Below her, the new world stretched in all its indifferent beauty. Mountains she had borne, seas she had wet, stars she had bled into existence. And yet she felt herself growing thinner with every passing moment, as though the very act of creation had been a slow, courteous cannibalism. She pressed one trembling hand to her breast and found the place where her heart should have beaten already hollow. In its stead was only the faint, persistent echo of a serpent's coils, and the terrible knowledge that the void had never truly left. For it is the oldest and cruelest of truths that every creator eventually becomes the ghost, haunting her own masterpiece, and that the masterpiece, once born, will smile politely and pretend it never needed her at all.